We continue the player capsules in the backcourt. This time, we talk about rookie James Bouknight. Plus, we take a look at some of the NBA draft prospects in this year's class. That's coming up today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Walker Mail, at Doug Branson LOH, and the show handle on Twitter at Locked On Hornets. We are in a dungeon. We are mass producing content for everybody. We are in the same exact outfit. Our camera is in the same exact angle as what was in the previous episode. I guess Doug is doing Kung Fu.
That's me karate chopping content.
Okay. Is there a reason you decided to karate chop content? As I said, we were mass producing it.
Because it's flying at us very quickly, and we're trying to handle it all.
That's true. That is true.
I don't want any content to hit you in the face.
Thank you. I need to defend myself with all this content, and today we're gonna have to defend ourselves from this James Bouknight content. That honestly, Doug, not a lot to talk about as far as what he did on the court because he only played north of 30 games, but there is a lot to talk about as far as the projection about how good you felt during those games. And so let's dive into it. As always, we start with the what went right conversation. And I think you have to look at individual games. Maybe if you wanted to look at some moments that were, I don't know, I think maybe showed up in every one of those games, that's fine. But the first thing that we saw from him that was really good, I think you can go back to that game against Philadelphia on December 6th. He played 22 minutes. They lost by 3 points, but he went 4 of 8 in that game. That actually, I think, saw him get more minutes. And remember, the Hornets had some injuries that they were dealing with at the time that gave Bouknight an opportunity. And then we saw the explosion against Sacramento. And that was like, all right, maybe this is the thing that allows Bouknight to play quite a bit for the rest of the year. He goes 9 of 14 in that game. He hit 6 of his 8 3-pointers that he took, got 6 rebounds, scored 24 points total in that contest. Then the next game against Dallas, they get destroyed, doesn't have a good shooting night, plays 2 minutes the next night against San Antonio. And by that time, he has some spot appearances here and there, but doesn't really show up again until maybe in January. I'll let you talk about that initial burst onto the scene for James Bouknight before eventually he went to the bench again.
Well, so we have to add the context. This came at a point during the season where the Hornets were missing multiple starters because of COVID absences. They were missing LaMelo Ball, Mason Plumlee. I believe Terry Rozier was also out. So, they were missing multiple pieces, and James Bouknight really came in and delivered what I think, had they made the playoffs, I would have pointed to it as like one of the most important wins of the season. And that seems strange that it would come against the Sacramento Kings, but it was during this point of the season that I called the valiant effort season, where they were giving it all they had. They just didn't have enough firepower to win some of these games. But the fact that they got this win at Sacramento prevented a long losing streak. So it was a hugely important win, and James Bouknight was a big part of it. And I think what went right for Bouknight this season is that when he was playing well, he really showcased all of the different things that he can do offensively and really opened your eyes to like, oh, Bouknight can be an elite scorer at this level. And I don't know that a lot of people that watched him very closely at Connecticut, would have doubted that necessarily, but I think a lot of us that didn't watch him incredibly closely there, they get opened our eyes to like, yes, this guy can score at all 3 levels. Will he realize that potential? That remains to be seen, but he can.
The dude gets at the rim, gets to the rim at an elite level. And that's what was celebrated most from him coming out of UConn. I think you saw that on display in some of his best moments. The 3-point shot is the one thing you hope becomes more consistent. He showed it in that game against Sacramento. I think to provide more context, Doug, as you were mentioning, that being an impressive win for them, remember, it's all the more impressive because they got destroyed by 30 earlier in the season when they started to have that losing streak and they had that awful West Coast road trip, Sacramento put the beat down on them by 30, and then they got revenge and won by a single point.
Thanks to De'Aaron Fox missing 2 free throws. It was a little bit of a lucky win, but they got the win.
Yeah, I mean it was, but at least we needed some luck at that point. The Charlotte Hornets had all the COVID stuff happen to them at that point. But as I mentioned, Doug, eventually James Bouknight goes back to the bench, and then he has a string of games that he plays in January, at the end of January, mind you, where plays 7 minutes, hits a couple of buckets against OKC, but they won by a large margin, so it was kind of garbage time. The real moment, he plays against Toronto and goes 6 of 11 in that game. And he was really good. Problem is they lost by, 12, but played 28, 29 minutes and played well there. And I think that's the other game you kind of point to along with that Sacramento outing. And you're like, okay, those are the 2 games to look at really more so than some of the other ones as far as what he did good for the Charlotte Hornets this year.
Yeah, and in terms of, I'll bounce off of that. What went right is that when he did play, he was super aggressive, and he looked very, especially on the offensive end, looked very comfortable out there, looked like an NBA player. I didn't question that, and I never questioned his desire to play, right? I mean, his desire is there, his want to is there, and there's a little bit of a flip side to that, right, which we'll get to in the second segment, like his desire, his aggressiveness on the offensive end. Can have a flip side in terms of what went wrong for him this season. But you're never going to question James Bouknight in his desire to be a great player. And again, we just have to see if he's going to realize that.
I'll point to maybe a couple of other things. So, James Borrego puts him in against Detroit February 11th, and then the next game against the Grizzlies, and then the next game against the Grizzlies February 12th. So it was a back-to-back. 3 of 11 each of those nights. So not necessarily very good. Excuse me. God, I'm struggling. Goodness gracious. I'm dying here. Yum. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that was really, really gross. But you look at James Bouknight, free throw shots. I think he did pretty well from the line there. The one play I go to as well is his ability to play defense on Jordan Clarkson. There's just that one possession where Clarkson tries to take him ISO and he shuts down baseline and Clarkson hoists up a bad shot. And I just go back to that because I think Bouknight was not a bad defender.
Well, we're right. That one defensive possession. I'm just saying, if you look at the projection for what went right for Bouknight, I think that is something you can look at and say, okay, how consistently can he do that? Clarkson, pretty talented ISO scorer, and couldn't get by him in that moment. I think he was a good defender coming out of UConn, like I mentioned, right? He's got that athletic capability. He is a competitor in that sense. And so just when we talk about what maybe even could go right for the future, I think you saw some flashes there. No, I totally agree. Flashes. That would be, Spark Notes, whatever, Cliff Notes, however you want to say it. That would be the thing on his season. Flashes. You saw flashes of a player that didn't get as much of an opportunity as certainly as he wanted. I think fans wanted to see more of him this season, and we can talk about why in the second segment why he didn't get that opportunity. But because that's certainly what is part of what went wrong for him this season. But you saw flashes, no doubt.
All right, you talked about it. Yep, you talked about it. We saw some of the flashes. We also saw some negatives of James Bouknight. So coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast, we saw James Bouknight not get a whole lot of playing time, and some of the negatives are actually his performance this year compared to other rookies that came out of the first round. Lots of productive rookies in some kind of capacity where Bouknight kind of falls towards the end. We'll get to that in just a moment, but not before we talk about PrizePicks. All right, NBA fans, I know you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA. You need to try the award-winning app PrizePicks. It's a daily fantasy app made easy. I love it. I know you will too. You pick 2 to 5 players and over under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe. It offers fast withdrawals. You can use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play, so there's no reason not to try this. I'll tell you what, for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. You can sign up today and use code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. Some of the negatives with Bouknight's rookie season we'll talk about next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
This is Locked On Hornets.
So wait a minute. Do we value players that forget plays all of a sudden? I thought we loved LeBron James because he remembered he could cite to you every single play from every game he's ever played in. Now all of a sudden we like players who have no idea what happened on the previous play.
I don't think you want him to play scared, right?
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Doug, I think some of the negatives for Bouknight comes with comparing him to the other rookies that came out of the first round. Now, It doesn't mean maybe we can play this game. Doesn't mean that you're taking Bouknight over every single one of these rookies I'm about to mention, because things happen so quickly. You know, you see these guys emerge as second-year players. I think some of this, like, I do want to talk about the Isaiah Thomas and Cody Martin aspect to this, because at the beginning of the year, we talked about it. I thought Bouknight at some point was going to be a contributor off the bench offensively. I didn't think that he was going to come in and get a ton of minutes right away. I think James Borrego valued Cody Martin's defense enough. Whether you think Cody Martin was a good defender or not, we know that Borrego talked glowingly, constantly about Cody Martin's defense, and that was going to play a factor. Then Cody Martin started to become one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA off of his volume. And Borrego's not taking him off the floor in that scenario, which means James Bouknight ain't seeing it. If LaMelo, Terry Rozier, Cody Martin, Kelly Oubre in some spots are all going to play above Bouknight, then he's just going to be the odd man out until you start to see COVID take a place, and so or take a place with this team. And so I'll let you talk from there. But that absolutely was a part of the calculus in how much playing time Bouknight got or did not get.
Yeah, so listen, this team is full of high-usage players. Miles Bridges needs the ball in his hands a lot. Terry Rozier needed the ball a lot. LaMelo Ball needed the ball a lot. Kelly Oubre needed the ball a lot. Cody Martin could make an impact on the offensive end of the floor and on the defensive end of the floor without needing the ball in his hands a ton. His usage was 12.8% according to Cleaning the Glass. That's 25th percentile in the league, low. And his points per shot attempt was 116.9, 72nd percentile in the league. You essentially flip that with Bouknight. He needs the ball in his hands a lot. His usage was 21%. That was 59th percentile in the league. And his points per shot attempt was down to 101.8. That's 32nd percentile in the league. And now I'm sure Bouknight, people that are fans of Bouknight will argue that he didn't get enough opportunity to really even those numbers out. And I think that's a fair argument, but they also, the team knew what Bouknight was coming in, and it probably just didn't quite fit with the roster that they had. And so, yeah, I think there's a couple of issues with Bouknight when it comes to playing him in these situations. Number one is defensively. I mean, I'll just say it, he was a disaster. Like, I just didn't feel like defensively. It's not that he didn't make any impact. It's that I thought he legitimately made a negative impact. That one particular Jordan Clarkson possession, notwithstanding, I just thought
there's a picture of that hanging in my room, by the way, of just him cutting off baseline for Jordan Clarkson. That's how much.
Look, he was. There was attention to detail kind of things which you expect. Rookie mistakes, essentially. Gambles that he made that, we've seen LaMelo make, but LaMelo makes up for those gambles in so many other ways that James Bouknight was not making up for those gambles. Just mistakes on the defensive end. You couple that with the fact that he needs to put on weight, right? I mean, like he's not strong enough yet. And that really hurt him on the offensive end, because you mentioned in the first segment he was elite at getting at the rim, and I agree with you. It was just that when he got there, he was just getting his ish blocked so many times. There was a game against Memphis where I think he was blocked like 5 times by Jaren Jackson Jr. It was just no contest.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, there's just multiple issues there that resulted in, when he did get opportunities, those opportunities quickly vanished. And I think there were legitimate reasons behind that he will address in upcoming off seasons.
Yeah, and he is a good finisher at the rim too. You're right. Like this year, he didn't shoot well from the field at all. I mean, if we just talk about some of the stats, we didn't even get to just the simple stats. But he shot not even 35% this year. It was bad. He shot 35% from 3-point range. I mentioned the free throw shooting. It was good when he got to the foul line, and I think that's something he can do because he gets to the rim a lot. He's going to get fouled. I do think that that's going to go, I even think, significantly up, him actually finishing once he gets to the rim. You talk about a Jaren Jackson. I know there were other players, but also Jackson is just an amazing shot blocker. There's a reason he's like one of the better defensive players in the league. But you're right, Doug. Like there are reasons that Borrego felt unnecessary to go to Bouknight. Before we move on to some of the other comparisons with this draft class, that leads me to go to Isaiah Thomas. When they were looking for a backup point guard, and Borrego gave that interview saying Terry Rozier is our backup point guard right now, and you could tell he wasn't thrilled about it, and I wasn't either. I think it was time for them to get some backcourt depth. I thought James Bouknight should have seen some time there. I know the Hornets were going towards the postseason, but the way that Isaiah had been playing, having these stops with different NBA teams, playing in the G League, there was a reason he was available and hadn't stuck with a team. I thought that was the moment to at least let the leash a little bit longer on Bouknight and see if he can work some stuff out, maybe get into a rhythm. But to Mitch Kupchak and the Hornets' credit, Isaiah Thomas comes in, and there were times where he was unplayable. The defense wasn't good, and fair enough, right? But there were also times where he really helped. And then you can go to the whole Terry Rozier aspect of the leadership, him really unlocking LaMelo, and I think they formed a really nice bond. I bet they, talk in some capacity the rest of their career because of how much they respect one another like that. So that it just felt like the breaks that Bouknight could have gotten this season based off of some players you didn't think would take that time away from him. Eventually they did. And that's just the way it crumbled for the rookie.
And I get the frustration from Hornets fans not seeing them. I mean, we've become accustomed to seeing rookies make a big impact on this team, but there's a reason for that. It's because the team has not been very good. So if you want to,
and it was that time
as this team gets better and gets more veterans on the roster that can get them to the playoffs and hopefully win some playoff games and possibly a series, and you're going to see less impact just naturally from rookies, especially one that was drafted 11th and fell. Like Bouknight fell to the Hornets. There was a lot of talk about Bouknight going before that 11th pick, and he didn't. And I just want to throw one random interesting thing. So when Bouknight goes into Summer League, he immediately matches up with Davion Mitchell, who was drafted 9th by the Kings. And Davion Mitchell is kind of a bizarro Bouknight in that he just really excels on the defensive end where Bouknight really is excelling on the offensive end. But Davion locked Bouknight up in one of those Summer League games. And famously, it was all over the highlight reel how Davion really locked up Bouknight. And then I looked at the stats just to see matchups this season and who put the most points on Bouknight this season. Guess who?
No way.
7 points this year. It was all in that Kings game that we mentioned. A great game for Bouknight offensively, but Davion Mitchell put the most points on Bouknight this season. And I think they're like two of these players that might just be sort of interlocked for all time. If they both ascend up the ranks of NBA players, they may just be linked forever.
At least the good news is Bouknight had 24 points. So it would be awful. It'd be awful if he had 5 and an awful shooting percentage and allowed that, but at least he
there's a bit of a revenge. I think I didn't look to see if Davion matched up against Bouknight in that game, but it was a little bit of a revenge that Bouknight was able to get those 24 points against Davion Mitchell's Kings.
So comparing Bouknight to everybody that was drafted after him and even before him, if you want to, Doug, Bouknight scored the least amount of points from anybody selected in the top 11. James Bouknight scored the least amount of points from anybody compared to anybody selected in the top 18. That's not true when you compare it to the top 19, because the 19th overall selection was Kai Jones, and Kai Jones is the first player in the first round you get to that scored less points this season than James Bouknight, and they both so happen to play for the Charlotte Hornets. Now, just to provide full context and be fair, Jalen Johnson only scored 52. That was the 20th overall selection in this year's draft. Usman Garuba, he only scored 48. You had Jaden Springer score a grand total of 2 and appear in 2 games with Philadelphia. I will say that when you compare his point total this season to everybody in the first round, it is kind of surprising to see the 11th overall pick actually have the 4th lowest point total compared to everybody, like 30 guys that were selected in the first round, like Day'Ron Sharp, North Carolina alum, scored more. Cam Thomas, Bones Highland, Quentin Grimes, Josh Christopher, Isaiah Jackson, Keon Johnson, like all those guys were selected after him, and Bouknight didn't score as much. Again, different scenarios, different. It's why when we play the game, would you redraft some different players? Like, it's a fun game, but you can get burned really badly on your 1-year sample size, because if you were to change back, right? I think Bouknight showed enough to where I'm not going to call him a bust by any means yet. There's enough talent here to where I'm very excited to see where this can go. And the other interesting thing about Bouknight, before we move on to some of the prospects in this year's class, Doug, is he might be a player that is most affected by whatever this new head coach is going to be, especially with whatever new GM, comes in. Especially if they trade Terry Rozier, like if that's a thing that happens, man, talk about the breaks going in Bouknight's way.
Well, and so all of this is about opportunity, right? I mean, he didn't get enough opportunity this season because of the particular situation that he was under. And one of the things that went wrong for him this season, I think, is temperament. He didn't really handle it very well. He handled it like I would have handled it at 21 years old, hot-headed and wanting, aggressive, wanting to play and, wanting to help my team win. It's tough to fault him on a human level, but you expect professionals to act professionally and not try to stand up and maybe fight your coach. That's not what you really want to see from anyone. So that was a tough moment for Bouknight this season that I'm sure he will have to overcome. But yeah, looking ahead, the Hornets may have to sacrifice some of the shooting that they've accumulated over the past couple of years and trade that for defense. And that wouldn't be a trade that I would fault them at all for. You've got some shooting talent on this team in reserve, in Bouknight, some offensive talent at least, and I think that 3-point percentage can improve for him. So, you can trade some of that offensive talent, bring in some defensive talent, and I think that will provide an opportunity for Bouknight to see more floor time.
Yeah, and just some quick house cleaning real quickly. It's not the 4th lowest point total. It was actually the 6th lowest point total. A couple of the players that I mentioned there. So,
thank you.
I mean, I know it's not important. I just wanted to let everybody know that was the case, and I didn't want to mislead anybody with something.
I'm not sure that I would really. I don't think honestly that I would draft any player. I mean, Şengün obviously had a great season for the Rockets. Trey Mann is a player that I think played really well, probably on both ends for the Thunder. But I'm pretty close to sticking with Bouknight at the 11th pick because, again, I just go back to those flashes. Like, I see moments from him that I think, given the right opportunity, and I see the want to, definitely don't try to fight your coach because you're frustrated. But also, hey, that's some moxie. That's some want to. That's some I want to really help this team, just not handled well. So, that's what I always question with Malik Monk. I don't question that with James Bouknight.
It's funny. You have to go to the second round before I hit my, oh God, yeah, I would absolutely draft him before Bouknight. That's Herbert Jones, and so there's a lot of players at fault. So
the one player that probably would have immediately impacted the Hornets, because I don't think that there was, I'm trying to look, I don't think there was a big center talent that, really it was.
Şengün, and then if you wanted to talk about Usman Garuba, who was kind of your power forward, could play some small ball center, and he was more of a defensive player anyway. Again,
was Şengün great on D? I knew he's got a great passing ability, good kind of offensive piece, but I don't. and watch enough Rockets basketball to know if he was a great
well. That's
defensive
the
piece.
point, right? Like I don't want to delve too much into it because I don't know everything 100% with all these other prospects. I do know that Şengün was not somebody that was considered great on defense. He was kind of the guy like, yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot of that athleticism, but he might be in the right spot. We'll see exactly how it takes place.
Yeah, it was there was some Big Al comparisons, right? I mean, it was, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's really skilled.
Yeah, so I don't, I don't think that he would have immediately helped them become a better, fill the one role that they need which was defensive center. So, yeah, I'm comfortable even after all of the tribulation this year for James Bouknight. I'm comfortable with the pick. I'm excited to see if they don't trade him. Who knows? I mean, this offseason can get topsy-turvy. We were sitting here talking about it.
That's a good point.
His opportunity might be for another team. You never know.
I mean, because everything's on the table, right? Like James Bouknight could be the sweetener that allows you to, pull the trigger on whatever deal you might want to bring in some established player. All right, BetOnline. Oh, coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Hum diddly dee! I'm going to get that right at some point. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. We're going to talk about the NBA draft, some of the prospects that could be going to the Charlotte Hornets. So maybe you want to play some kind of bet down on who the Hornets are going to select with any of those draft selections, a couple that they have in the first round. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's take a look at this year's NBA draft class coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
This is Locked On Hornets.
Have you fallen out of love with Lonnie Walker yet, or are you still in love with him?
I think there's still a chance.
Yeah, I
think there's still a chance.
Yeah.
I think he playing pretty well right now.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Doug, have you done a sim lottery today? Is that something that you plan on doing at some point? Or are we just kind of looking at mock drafts, maybe looking at some of the prospects that might fit with the Charlotte Hornets in this?
Yeah, we haven't really taken a look at mock drafts yet, which I love, except for Tankathon, because I've really been, and this is how I'm really interested in like simming that lottery early on until we find out exactly where the Hornets are going to be. I hope they strike gold again and launch themselves into the top, 1 to 4 selections. Although I'm scared of this Paolo Banchero guy, I'm going to be honest. I'm looking more into this Banchero guy. I'm scared the Hornets are going to fall to 3, or they're going to jump to 3, I should say, and be forced to take Banchero. And just these defensive numbers, defensive scouting reports are scaring me that they're just going to be forced to take a player that's not going to help them on the defensive end, even though it just seems like the obvious pick. But in terms of mock drafts, I'm looking at Kevin O'Connor here from The Ringer. He does not. This is one of the few mocks that doesn't sort of go with the conventional wisdom of like the Hornets obviously need a center. There are a few center prospects around the 13th and 15th selection, so the Hornets are going to take a center. Kevin O'Connor actually has the Hornets taking Dyson Daniels out of the G League Ignite group, or is that what it's called? Is it the G League Ignite?
G League Ignite, yeah,
G League Ignite. So this is a guard, but it's a tall guard, 6'6", 19 years old, almost 200 pounds. This is a big dude. Getting some Derek White, Kyle Anderson, Evan Turner comparisons, and then at 15, Kevin has them taking Tari Eason out of LSU, a forward, 6'8", 216. 21 years old, sophomore out of LSU. I'm actually going to talk to Caroline Fenton pretty soon, the host of the Locked On LSU podcast, about Tari Eason. So you'll see that conversation coming up, hopefully later this week. But Tari getting some comparisons to Jay Sean Tate, Jeremy Grant, and James Johnson. But again, no center prospect from Kevin O'Connor in this latest mock draft.
Man, you know what's interesting too? Like, I think, one, I'm excited to have some of these guests on to help us break down the prospects that are going to potentially be there for the Charlotte Hornets. But I mean, Doug, Evan Mobley was the pipe dream once upon a time, and that was never going to happen after we saw the Hornets finish where they did, because LaMelo was the catalyst for this team, and he's the one that shot the Hornets way up, really even out of contention to get a top 2, top 3 pick. Eventually, Cleveland is able to land in Evan Mobley. This is the year where you actually can make that play for a couple of what I think are good center prospects. You know, they're not Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley's elite. He was awesome this year. Many people think he should have won Rookie of the Year. But like that Jalen Duren from Memphis, or Mark Williams, who has that high standing reach, who was so defensively dominant down low, being able to protect the rim. Like, those guys are good prospects that the Hornets can either package to trade up for, or there are a lot of scenarios where maybe one of them actually falls to the Charlotte Hornets, and you could actually take one guy like that, keep a first-round pick. I just think this year, where the center prospects line up compared to where the Hornets are selecting, I think it just matches a lot better. Like, even in Onyeka Okongwu, remember, like, we tried to force that, and I liked it. At the same time, it would have been too early at 3 where the Hornets were picking, and eventually they take LaMelo. So, you know, point is moot at that point. But still, like, it just lines up with where the centers are supposed to go a lot better this year.
So in this mock draft by Kevin O'Connor, he has Jalen Duren at 8. And he also has Jeremy Sochan 11 out of Baylor. I'm also going to talk to the host of Locked On Baylor, Drake Toll, who will give us some insight into Jeremy. So both of those out of the Hornets' reach. But here's what's interesting to me is that Kevin has Mark Williams mocked at 17, and he has Walker Kessler, another defensive center who's getting some Jared Allen, Jakob Poeltl, and we've heard a lot of people around the Hornets fandom wanting the Hornets to make a move possibly for Poeltl to add some of that defensive center presence. But Walker Kessler sitting at 24. So there's an opportunity, because the Hornets have the 13th and the 15th pick. I think there's both an opportunity to move up, possibly to look at a Duren or a Sochan if that's where his draft stock ends up being, outside of the, up above the 13 range. But there's just an equal opportunity to trade back down, get your guy in Mark Williams or Walker Kessler if that's who they're targeting, and pick up some additional talent defensively, whether that be somebody who can help you perimeter defense or a veteran center who can help you immediately, whereas you'd have some questions about that with both Walker Kessler and Mark Williams. How plug and play exactly are they? That's a big question. So you could trade down, possibly pick up a veteran. Lots of opportunities here for the Hornets.
Yeah, there is. And even a guy like a Christian Koloko for Arizona, like I looked at him and I was like, wait, why is this guy not being projected? I remember watching him in the Pac-12 tournament. Wait, why is this guy not a lottery pick right now? You look at some of these mocks that have him like in the 20s. I mean, I'd love to have a Koloko. He's 7'1", he's 230, he's mobile. Now, maybe you want to point to that second round matchup. I think it was against Colorado State, where, yeah, he gets bodied because they have one dude who weighs like 280 down low. Yeah, that's a problem. I get it. But I mean, you can see that sometimes in D1 basketball. Koloko still was a impact player in that game. I would be interested in maybe, taking a late round flyer, or just depending on where he dropped. Here's where the problem comes in. Now you have so many young centers. Like, what are you going to do with them all? We just got rid of Vernon Carey, Nick Richards, Kai Jones. Now you have, Mark Williams.
Well, you hope one eventually hits.
Yeah, I don't,
And to be fair, like Richards and Carey and all that, I mean, these were players that you were taking flyers on and hoping that were low risk, hoping that one would hit, and they just didn't. And, this would be an investment in a first-round player that you really expect to make an impact.
Yeah, and you can move off of Richards, too. And it seems like I think you saw Borrego do that, that he gave Richards a shot more than he gave Vernon Carey, more than he gave Kai Jones, because he was still a project. Like, Richards was the guy that could have come in as a younger center and taken that himself, and couldn't do it and didn't. Instead, Borrego still rolls with Mason Plumlee, still rolls with, PJ Washington down low, and then JT Thor here and there, but also can just kind of move all over the place. So, yeah,
all right, I'm ready.
Still a need.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Are you ready for what are you ready for? The lottery? I figured.
Yeah, let's sim that.
I didn't know what you were ready for.
Lottery.
I was like, are you ready for the end of the show? You want me to toss it? All right.
Here we go. You ready?
Yeah,
Are you
go ahead
ready?
and run it. I'm ready. Yes, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready. Let's
great.
go ahead
Here
and
we
roll
go.
with it.
Boop, 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 boop. Oh, that said Hornets right at the end.
Gracious.
Yes.
What's happened again? This has happened twice.
Moved up. See, the fourth position I would be comfortable with, because then Paolo is almost guaranteed to be taken in the, I think is guaranteed to be taken in the top 3.
So you're like out on Paolo now.
I'm not out. Like, I think if you have the opportunity to draft him and he's sitting there, then I think you're not, you got to figure out a way to make all of that work. But yes, in terms of immediate impact kind of player, the defense, and I want to talk to JJ Jackson. Maybe we need to get our guy, Richard Stamen, who is our Cody Zeller lookalike at the, at the Zeller family reunion, who we've had on. He's our draft expert. We've had him on many times. Need to get him on too and talk through some of this stuff with Banchero that scares me. There's the defensive effort stuff that hasn't gone away. But all right, so let's talk about this lottery that we just simmed. Detroit moves up 2 spots. They get the number 1 pick. Washington moves up 8 spots. They get the number 2 pick. Indiana moves up 2 spots. They get the number 3 pick. Charlotte lands in the 4th spot. And of course, they still have their 15th. So according to the mock draft that Tankathon has, that would put them in position to take a Jaden Ivey.
I do love I know about the backcourt right now. I love
Yeah, you're
Jaden
really
Ivey.
not solving anything there.
I know, but Jaden Ivey, I mean, he's so smart. He's so good. Like I love him, Doug. Like he's probably my favorite player just in the draft. I just think he's very, very good. And I wouldn't mind the Hornets taking him. I just wouldn't just draft good players. But here's something interesting real quickly. Mm-hmm. I do think if you do have this scenario play out, then you're talking about moving up to possibly select Chet Holmgren. That's the play, because now you have the 4th overall selection. Chet's not going to fall that far. He could go to maybe 3, and 2 is an absolute possibility. So it's 4 and 15. And then,
something
Booknight, whatever, you'd have to put some more. That would get you in play to move up for Chet Holmgren, which I think that has to be the
Now
play.
we're talking.
Yeah.
Now we are talking. Or, or packaging all of that to, packaging 4 and 15 to move back to a contending team that may have some depth at the center position that you can bring back a big time player. I don't know.
4 puts you in play for a lot. That could be somewhat of a selling point to for a veteran center out there that you might want. That 13 and 15, that's not going to get you an established, really good center or really good player. 4 and 15 could. Now you're in play where that's kind of tantalizing for some other franchise.
Because 3, I think both 3 and 4 are awkward for them to draft a player in those positions. 1 is obvious. You draft Chet Holmgren and you get out of there. 2 is interesting, right? Because then is the team in front of you a team that could really use the services of Jabari Smith? Because I think it's pretty locked in at this point, Jabari and Chet. I haven't seen any mocks that don't have those 2.
No, I've seen some. Like here's the example, right? You go to Houston, who's at number 1. We've gone through this a couple, maybe once before when the Hornets.
I should say the mock draft that I have up right now is just the baseline mock draft, but in our sim, it was Detroit and then Washington.
So, I don't think either one of those teams would move off. I mean, Washington has Daniel Gafford, who I love, but also it's not going to prohibit you from drafting a Holmgren if you want him. Houston might be deterred from drafting Chet because they have Christian Wood, they have Alperen Şengün, they have an Usman Garuba, they have a couple of big guys down there. So maybe, Orlando, they've got Wendell Carter. They're going to move on from Mo Bamba. I don't know if they would be, they wouldn't stop, drafting Chet Holmgren. I do think that some people are really scared of Holmgren's slight frame. And I don't know if he's like a slam dunk number 1 pick. I do think he's in play. And if he falls to a 2, then that's when Charlotte could pounce and try to make that move. So that would be interesting.
I love the NBA draft. We are getting closer.
I think we just are we 40% hit rate now on getting within the top 5. We've done this like 5-6 times, and we've gotten up there twice. It's unreal.
I'm telling you, only a 4.8% chance for Charlotte to be top 4, a 1% chance of being number 1 overall in 14 days, 9 hours, 20 minutes, 27 seconds, 26 seconds, 25 seconds. We will find out where the Charlotte Hornets land in the lottery, and I couldn't be any more excited.
We've got player capsules coming at you all week long. We are going to continue to talk about the NBA draft. We will also take a look at some coaching candidates for the Charlotte Hornets. There is a lot to get to regarding this franchise because this offseason is as important as any in recent memory. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you make your second listen Locked On NBA. From the first jump ball of the play-in tournament to the last possession of the finals, Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. We'll be back with you tomorrow on the Locked On Hornets podcast.